Hello everyone, and welcome to this video. If you'd like subtitles or translation, just click the settings icon, turn on subtitles or closed captions, and then select Auto Translate to choose your preferred language. Let me briefly introduce myself. I'm an educator with about 20 years of experience. I've also previously served in the leadership team. Most importantly, I'm a parent of a student at Calgary Christian School. Today, I'd like to share a thoughtful and professional response to the video recently posted by a pastor who teaches the religious ethics course at the CCS high school. I'm not speaking from a particular theological position. I'm speaking as an educator and as a parent, someone deeply committed to educational balance, critical thinking, and classroom integrity. Let's begin by looking at how this teaching was presented. First, emotional framing of teaching materials can compromise critical thinking development. In his video, the pastor says, "We're not teaching students what to think, but how to think." That is a great educational goal, one I fully support. But in practice, the delivery of the content did not match this intention. When discussing same-sex marriage, he says, "We should mourn the suffering and pain that LGBTQ+ folks have had to experience, often because of how Christians have stewarded the conversation." Now, of course, compassion and empathy are essential elements in our education, especially Christian education. But as educators, we must also be careful that emotional framing doesn't outweigh balanced analysis. When one viewpoint is presented with personal stories and empathy strongly, and the other is presented briefly without the same emotional depth, students may be led emotionally toward one conclusion before they've had the chance to critically evaluate both sides. This isn't about right or wrong theology. It's about giving students space to think critically without subtle emotional influence. Next, when teaching complex theology, balance matters more than ever. A pastor spends several minutes exploring the Greek word arsenokoitai and explaining how some modern scholars interpret ancient biblical texts. He discusses the possibility that Paul's writings may have referred to exploitative relationships, not mutually loving same-sex partnerships. This is no doubt a hot topic of theological discussion that takes place in many churches. While it's valid to explain that perspective, my concern is how the content is delivered. The affirming viewpoint is presented with historical background, linguistic perspective, and modern social context. In contrast, the other viewpoint, the one the pastor claims to hold, is only briefly mentioned. There's no detailed scriptural analysis or theological reasoning to support it. No discussion of how this view has been traditionally understood across Christian history. No equivalent emotional or intellectual depth. In education, this kind of imbalance shapes how students understand the presented perspectives and materials. It makes one view appear more thoughtful, more caring, or more correct, even if unintentionally, while the other comes across as less substantial or underdeveloped. That's not how we train critical thinkers. That's how we guide students toward a preformed conclusion. Now let's consider how this imbalance contradicts the stated neutrality of the pastor. The pastor says he holds what he calls a traditional or historic Christian view of marriage. In fact, he says this more than once, using phrases like, "That happens to be my view," and "It's possible to be traditional and kind. I try to live this out." And yet those statements are not followed by explanation. Instead, what follows is a deep, detailed exploration of the progressive, affirming view, with tone, language, and reasoning that lead the students to understand and possibly adopt this view. Again, I'm not criticizing the inclusion of progressive theology. I'm pointing out a serious imbalance in how the two major perspectives were handled. In a school serving over 120 church communities with many viewpoints, it's not appropriate to explain one position thoroughly and treat the other as a footnote. As educators, we are responsible for ensuring equal treatment of content, especially on sensitive issues. We must give students the resources and space to reach their own conclusions, not lead them to adopt ours. Now, some may respond by saying this video was just a brief summary, that it didn't capture the full picture of the actual lessons are conveyed, and there simply wasn't enough time to cover everything in detail. This is fair to say this, however, even in this short video, as the pastor says in the beginning of this video, he is trying to tell us what it's all about and where things are headed. The affirming view is expanded with care and depth, while the other view is only briefly acknowledged, and that alone is enough to reveal a serious imbalance in the way this topic is being taught. Since the goal is to tell us what it's all about and where things are headed, then the imbalance shown here very likely reflects the imbalance present in the course itself as well. To summarize what we've seen so far, the video reveals three major concerns: an emotional framing that influences student thinking, an uneven depth in presenting theological perspectives, and a lack of demonstrated neutrality from the instructor. Together, these raise serious doubts about the educational balance and instructional approach used in the religious ethics course. This brings us to a larger issue: educational oversight. In any classroom, especially one discussing ethical or theological issues, teachers must hold clear professional standards. These include presenting multiple viewpoints fairly, avoiding emotional or persuasive bias, and ensuring content is age-appropriate, respectful, and critically engaging. What I saw in the video suggests that this course, or at least this part of it, may not have gone through a proper instructional review process. And that's a concern not just for parents, but for educational leaders as well. When students are being led toward one interpretation, however subtly, that is not critical education, but guided influence. And in a Christian school where so many families come from diverse backgrounds, that is not an acceptable practice. At this point, we need to ask, was this content reviewed or approved by the leadership team at school? At the beginning of the video, the pastor says, "I was invited by the board to actually just talk about it and tell you firsthand where I'm coming from." This leads to important questions for both the CCS school board and the school's leadership team. Does this video represent the school's official theological stance? If it does, that needs to be communicated clearly to all families. If it doesn't, then why was the video released through the Info Calgary Christian School YouTube channel without a disclaimer or a parallel explanation of other views? Also, was the religious ethics curriculum reviewed in advance by leaders at school? Was it evaluated for balance, fairness, and neutrality? These are not minor concerns. These are fundamental questions of professional practice. Thank you for watching. If you are a parent, teacher, or student who believes in the importance of balanced education, I encourage you to speak up. Let's work together to support a school culture that values clarity, critical thinking, and fairness in every subject and every classroom. And let's keep building Calgary Christian School together with faith, wisdom, and love.